History is not just a story of great leaders or epic battles. Sometimes the fate of the world turns on the smallest of moments. A single choice, a moment of hesitation, or even a simple mistake. This is the story of 5 times when one human decision changed the course of history forever. It begins in 1918, on the blood-soaked fields of World War I. Imagine a British soldier, Henry Tandy, exhausted and covered in mud. He raises his rifle and aims at a wounded German soldier limping through the snow. Tandy has his target, but he hesitates. The man is unarmed, bleeding, and clearly poses no threat, so Tandy lowers his weapon and lets him live. The story goes that this soldier was a young Adolf Hitler. Historians still debate whether this encounter truly happened, but if it did, that single act of battlefield mercy may have ultimately cost the world millions of lives. It was the first flap of a butterfly's wings, a small gesture of compassion that would one day unleash a storm of unimaginable horror. Decades later, in October 1962, the world stood on the very edge of annihilation. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 days when nuclear war seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Deep beneath the waves, a Soviet submarine, B-59, was being pounded by American depth charges, attempting to force it to surface. Trapped and cut off from Moscow, the submarine's captain believed World War III had already begun. He decided to launch their secret weapon, a nuclear torpedo with the power of the Hiroshima bomb. The order to launch required the agreement of 2 senior officers. The captain gave the order. The political officer agreed. Both said yes. But there was a third man, Vasily Arkhipov. He refused to give his consent. He argued, against the panic and pressure, that they must surface first and await orders. That single act of defiance, that one voice of calm in the chaos, prevented a nuclear exchange that would have incinerated civilization. A quiet man in the darkness of the ocean saved the world. Then, just 2 decades later, in 1983, another Soviet officer faced a similar world-ending choice. His name was Stanislav Petrov. He was the officer on duty at a secret command center when the early warning system lit up with alarms. The computer screamed that 5 American nuclear missiles were heading straight for the Soviet Union. Protocol was absolute. He had to report it up the chain of command, which would trigger an immediate and total retaliatory strike. The fate of the world rested on his shoulders. But Petrov hesitated. Something didn't feel right. The launch was too small, the data too clean. He trusted his human instinct, his gut feeling that it had to be a false alarm. So he broke protocol and reported it as a system malfunction, and he was right. The satellites had mistaken the sun's reflection off high-altitude clouds for missile launches. If Petrov had simply followed orders, the world would have gone up in flames. Once again, a single human doubt and refusal to blindly obey the machine kept the world alive. But history's butterfly effect doesn't just pivot on choices of conscience. Sometimes it's pure, dumb luck. In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was visiting Sarajevo. An assassination attempt by a group of Serbian nationalists had already failed that morning. The Archduke was shaken, but decided to continue his visit. Later that day, his driver, trying to navigate the confusing streets, made a wrong turn. The car stalled right in front of a small cafe. And who was standing there, having given up on the plot? One of the failed assassins, Gavrilo Princip. Seeing his target delivered to him by chance, Princip seized the moment, walked up to the car, and fired 2 shots. Within weeks, the intricate web of European alliances unraveled, and the entire world was plunged into the Great War. A wrong turn, a tiny random mistake, and 20 million people would die. And finally, our last story begins not with a bang, but with a letter. In 1939, 2 brilliant scientists who had fled the rise of Nazism, Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, grew terrified that Germany was developing a new, terrifyingly powerful weapon using nuclear fission. They wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning him of this catastrophic possibility and urging the United States to begin its own research. That letter triggered the creation of the Manhattan Project, the secret, sprawling effort to build the atomic bomb. And with it, humanity entered the nuclear age. Einstein would later regret his role, saying, "Had I known, I would have never signed." A few pages of paper, a few sentences typed out of fear and foresight, and humanity gained the power to destroy itself. 5 stories, 5 moments. A choice born of mercy, another of courage, another of doubt. An accident of geography, and a warning written on paper. Each one was a tiny ripple that spread across time, shaping the violent, brilliant, and fragile century that followed. We like to think of history as inevitable, as a grand story that was always meant to be. But it isn't, it's fragile. It's balanced on the tiniest of moments, the smallest of decisions, and the quietest of voices. The flap of a butterfly's wings and the mud of a battlefield. In the crushing silence of a submarine, or in the ink of a letter. The world we live in today exists because of people we've never heard of, and the profound decisions they almost didn't make. If these stories moved you, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to Stories Off the Map, because sometimes the smallest stories hide the greatest truths. Thanks for watching.